What do you want to say to these two girls?
Rotten hell. How's that? Because that's exactly what I want them to do. I want them to go through the pain and agony my daughters went through. I want them to have no life because Skylar doesn't have one.
Skylar Neese, a 16-year-old honor student at University High, disappeared from her Star City, West Virginia home on the 6th of July 2012. Months later, it was discovered that her so-called best friends had murdered her in cold blood. There's a lot to this story. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get into it. Skylar Annette Neese was born to Mary and Dave Neese on the 10th of February 1996 and was often described as intelligent, compassionate, stubborn, and bubbly. Skylar was an only child. She grew up and went to elementary school in Cheat Lake, West Virginia. When Skylar was in the 2nd grade, she met Sheila Eddy. Sheila, born on the 29th of September 1995, was an only child. Despite the fact that Sheila lived 20 miles away, the two girls immediately became friends. Skylar and Sheila finally teamed up as freshmen at University High School in October 2010. At University High, the two met the red-headed Rachel Scholf, your typical, if somewhat gifted, aspiring actress and singer.
The world around me changes.
Like Skylar and Sheila, she too was an only child. Like Sheila, her parents were also divorced. The three started hanging out together and getting into trouble, drinking, smoking weed, breaking curfew. In retrospect, parents and friends of both Skylar and Rachel have claimed that Sheila was a bad influence and was seen as a bad seed. Some of Rachel's friends avoided hanging with her when she was with Sheila. They described her as mean and controlling. Rachel's friends had similar reservations about Sheila and blamed her for the changes in Rachel's personality and behavior. Nevertheless, Skylar had no intention of breaking up her relationship with Sheila, a friend she had looked up to for years. Rachel's reasons for staying with Sheila are less obvious. She was from a relatively affluent family, more popular, and didn't need Sheila for status. Perhaps she simply liked the fact that with Sheila she was able to do things, including intimate things, that she couldn't do with her friends who shared her religious background. Despite Sheila being often described as the root of all evil, it was Rachel entering the picture that caused the group dynamics and loyalties to shift. For a while, everything seemed to be going fine, even great, until their sophomore year. Skylar was put into an uncomfortable position when, during a sleepover in late summer 2011, she watched Sheila and Rachel have drunken sex together. The sleepover ended with Skylar and Sheila arguing. A rift began to grow between Skylar and Sheila, while Sheila and Rachel were growing even closer.
Oh my God, you know what? I need to tell you a secret. I just forgot.
You have a secret from me?
Well, I mean, I haven't told anyone.
Not even Skylar?
No.
Okay.
I didn't even tell Skylar that I get high. That's one of my secrets too. Like, I didn't tell her that. But anyways, well, I told my mom.
That what?
I rear-ended someone.
Skylar started to feel excluded. Often, Sheila and Rachel would dress alike, leaving Skylar as the odd girl out. Both Sheila and Rachel were sexually active and had boyfriends. They looked at Skylar as an immature little sister who had to tag along, but who also knew the girl's secrets. Skylar hinted at this on Twitter several times, such as on the 6th of September 2011. "I'd tell the whole school all the shit I have on everyone, which is a lot. Hashtag if I could get away with it." Arguments, often on Twitter, between Skylar and Sheila continued to worsen. A tipping point came when, in early June 2012, Skylar and Sheila spent their entire one-week trip to Myrtle Beach fighting. When they got home, Sheila told Rachel, "Skylar must die." Sheila's call for murder didn't come out of the blue. Fellow students and a teacher at University High overheard the girls discussing best ways to dispose of a body in October 2011. However, given that it was during a biology class focusing on forensic science and that a body had been found behind the school only some weeks earlier, the girls' topic hardly seemed out of place. But according to those who were there, the girls specifically were trying to figure out a way to get rid of Skylar. When the conversation was relayed to Skylar, she ignored it, saying it's just a game they've been playing. Even so, she confronted the girls about their conversation, but they assured her it was nothing. But that wasn't the only warning sign. In the spring of 2012, worried that Skylar might blackmail them, Rachel told another student, "I wouldn't mind if she died." She also said during a science class, "We should kill her." Still, despite all the dysfunction, the group continued to hang out together, and while Skylar was painfully and regretfully aware of the state of her friendship with Sheila, still her best friend, she had no idea what was coming. This was Skylar's last tweet. On Thursday the 5th of July, Skylar got home from work at around 10 p.m. She kissed her parents goodnight and went to her room. Around midnight, Sheila and Rachel either called or texted her, asking her to go for a joyride. Sheila parked her car next to the Neese's apartment, and Skylar, who had snuck out of her room many times before, placed a small bench beneath the room's window and joined the two girls. Unbeknownst to Skylar, the trunk of Sheila's car contained a shovel, fresh clothes, towels, and bleach. Sheila and Rachel had originally planned to follow Route 7 west. However, a police car parked near an intersection scared them off, so they took an alternative route. Sheila parked the car on a spot about a mile into the road. They chatted for a while and got ready to smoke some weed, but they didn't have a lighter. Skylar started walking towards the car to get a lighter. The girls counted to 3, and on this pre-arranged signal, started stabbing Skylar with knives they had hidden beneath their hoodies. Skylar tried to run, but she was tackled by Rachel. Skylar managed to grab her knife and fight back, inflicting a cut above Rachel's ankle. Too bad it wasn't her throat, but she was overpowered by the two girls stabbing her repeatedly. The girls then stood over her, someone they called their friend, and watched her die. In her dying moments, she could only whimper, "Why?" Sheila and Rachel had planned to bury Skylar, but the ground turned out to be too rocky for their shovels. Instead, they moved the body next to a big tree and covered her with rocks and branches. After washing themselves off in a creek that ran behind the site, the girls disposed of their bloody clothes and knives, but left Skylar's turned-off cell phone next to her body. All this took a few hours, and the girls were back home by dawn. Shortly after this, Sheila, in a demonstration of her narcissism, arrogance, and social media addiction, she retweeted at 9:09 a.m., "Always keep your cool." Skylar's parents had left for work early the next morning, assuming Skylar was still in her bed. Her father, Dave, came home around midday so that Skylar could borrow his car for her shift at Wendy's. However, no one was home and the door to Skylar's room was locked from the inside. Dave noticed a small bench outside and an open window and realized Skylar had snuck out at some point during the previous night. He immediately called Sheila to find out if she had been in contact with Skylar. She admitted to having talked to Skylar on the phone around midnight but hadn't seen her. Soon after Mary got home, a manager at Wendy's called asking about Skylar as she hadn't turned up for work that day. With the situation seeming more serious by the minute, the Neeses called the police. The phone rang again. This time it was Sheila calling back, admitting that she and Rachel had in fact gone joyriding with Skylar that previous night. According to her, they had picked up Skylar at around 11 p.m. and returned her home at the end of the street in less than an hour before midnight. Sheila and her mother arrived at the Neeses' apartment, wanting to help find Skylar. They went from house to house asking their neighbors if anyone had seen Skylar. Mary then remembered that the building had security cameras installed sometime earlier, which the landlord allowed them to view. On the surveillance video, Skylar is seen getting into a car at 12:31 a.m. This car had parked right next to the Neeses' apartment. None of the individuals looking at the grainy footage recognized it as Sheila's car, and they didn't suspect Sheila's story at this point, so they didn't bother to rewind to see if she had indeed picked up Skylar nearly 2 hours before she had gotten into this unknown vehicle. Considering the video evidence, the officers suggested the Neeses give it a couple of days, that Skylar had likely run away with someone voluntarily and was likely to come back. While the Neeses knew she would never do such a thing, they wanted to believe she had, as the alternative seemed much worse. The Star City Police Department assigned Officer Jessica Colbank to the case. The FBI also got involved almost immediately due to a possible link to an early missing person case. FBI agent Morgan Spurlock joined Colbank for the investigation. The two interviewed Sheila on the 9th of July. Sheila merely repeated what she had told them earlier about picking up Skylar at 11 p.m. and dropping her off less than an hour later. However, Colbank later described Sheila's behavior as narcissistic and wrong. Sheila seemed to be more curious about the investigation than worried about her missing friend. Colbank also found it strange that they had dropped Skylar off such a long way from her apartment, but Sheila simply said that Skylar had insisted they do so as she did not want to wake up her parents. Colbank also noticed Sheila's silver car and considered the possibility that the car could be the one she had seen in the video. The next day, Colbank called Rachel, who pretended not to have even heard of Skylar's disappearance. She had left for church camp on the 7th of July, but had spent the 6th of July boating with her mother and her mother's friend. Both had noticed a cut on Rachel's ankle. It was agreed that Rachel would show up for a face-to-face interview once she had got back from camp, but she never showed up. When Colbank later got a chance to interview Rachel face-to-face, she told the exact same story as Sheila. The fact that their stories matched to such a degree was suspicious, as if rehearsed. Nevertheless, there was nothing to go on officially. As Skylar had been seen voluntarily getting into a car, she was now considered a runaway, and the state police refused to issue an Amber Alert. No family member or friend of Skylar considered it likely that she simply ran away. Not only would it have been totally out of character, but she had also left her contact lenses, phone charger, and all the things a girl would take with her at home. Not to mention the bench and the open window that implied that when she left, she had every intention of coming back. The school year started on August the 16th, but Skylar hadn't returned home for what would have been her junior year in high school. The investigation seemed to be going nowhere. After an outburst at the Star City Police Department on the 24th of August, Mary contacted the state police, who immediately took on the case. Warrants were issued to seize means of electronic communication from Sheila and Rachel on the 3rd of September. The troopers also reviewed the surveillance tapes several times before finally figuring out Sheila had never been seen picking Skylar up at 11 p.m. They then combed through western parts of the state and were able to gather evidence from other security cameras around the city to call into question the timeline the girls had given them.
Start with her father, Dave Neese. Thank you, sir, for being here. Our hearts go out to you. We know these past 2 months must have been horrific. Tell us about what your daughter did right before she disappeared. How did she get out of your home, and what did she do, according to you, with her friends?
Well, she came home from work, like you said, that evening, and she got home and walked in the door. She went over to her mother, hugged and kissed her mother. She came over to me, kissed me, and, went to her bedroom, and that's the last we've seen of her.
Sheila, from the beginning, had tried to insert herself into the investigation by manipulating others. She cried on Skylar's bed not many days after having murdered her as a means to get on the Neese's good side. She distributed missing posters around town to give the appearance of a good friend. She inquired several times of the Neeses about the investigation, and when the police told the Neeses that they should not tell her anything, that she's the one who knows more than she's telling, she started using others to spy for her. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading in the halls of University High. Maybe Skylar had overdosed and the girls had left her somewhere in a panic. Sheila and Rachel seemed to be spending more and more time together and didn't seem too bothered by their best friend's disappearance. On their social media accounts, there was only a few sporadic mentions of Skylar whenever it seemed convenient. As the rumors intensified, so did the taunting and the harassment of the girls. They were eventually homeschooled. Anonymous Twitter accounts were set up to harass the girls, and whoever was behind these accounts seemed to have extensive knowledge of the case, including the ongoing criminal investigation. Sheila seemed unmoved by all the harassment, even referring to the FBI as her buds. Rachel, on the other hand, started to crack. If Sheila was trying to insert herself into the investigation, Rachel tried to get as far away from it as possible and from everything related to Skylar. While Sheila was deceitfully crying with the Neeses and pretending to be helping, Rachel never even visited Skylar's parents. All the harassment from the authorities and the other students started to take its toll on Rachel's mental health. And when she started to show signs of falling apart, for example, sobbing in front of Sheila, Sheila had no other response but to view her weakness with contempt. Having established with cell phone records and security camera footage that the girls had been near Blacksville that night and that Skylar had been texting with the girls when they were supposed to be, according to the girls' initial story, joyriding with them, Rachel now changed her story. She now claims Skylar had run off into the woods and that she and Sheila had been unable to find her. Sheila changed her story to match Rachel's only after she had learned Rachel had changed hers. Polygraphs for the girls were arranged for mid-December. Sheila was confident she would pass. She failed. Rachel was supposed to meet up with her attorney before the polygraph, but on the way, she jumped out of her dad's car and ran away. On the 16th of December, with Christmas fast approaching and Skylar not any closer to coming home, Mary posted a long, detailed message on her Facebook account. The post detailed the various steps that had been taken so far by law enforcement and the community in order to find Skylar. Mary also implicitly called Sheila and Rachel out for lying and even mentioned the possibility that Skylar might have been murdered. Haunted with a guilty conscience and the mounting pressure from law enforcement, Rachel snapped, and one day in December she started running around the neighborhood screaming, "You're ruining my life!" As the confrontation moved inside, it escalated into a physical altercation between Rachel and her mum. Eventually, Rachel barricaded herself into the room and threatened to kill herself.
I have an issue with a 16-year-old daughter of mine. I can't control her anymore. She's screaming. She's running through the neighborhood. Give me the phone. No, this is over. This is over. Hurry up. Oh, God. Hurry up, please.
The police soon arrived and Rachel was taken to a psychiatric hospital. While there, Sheila grew nervous of the implications of her friend's breakdown. Unbeknownst to Rachel's parents, Rachel had broadcasted everything live to Sheila via FaceTime. Sheila tried twice to get to see her, but the staff had been instructed to only allow family members to visit. On the 3rd of January, 5 days after Rachel was released from hospital, she was again interviewed by the police. Being aware of Rachel's visit to the psychiatric hospital, the investigators were hopeful that the truth would finally come out, and oh boy, it sure did. Only a few questions into the interview, Rachel uttered the words, "We stabbed her." Having expected something along the lines of, she overdosed, the truth shocked everyone in the room. Rachel told them what had happened, that they had picked up Skylar after midnight, driven to a remote back road, stabbed her to death and buried her body. When asked why they did it, she could only come up with, "We just didn't like her anymore." It was agreed that Rachel would take them to their body immediately. The investigators, Rachel and her attorney, drove 2 cars crossing the state line into Pennsylvania. When they arrived at the location where Rachel said they had killed Skylar, it was so snowy Rachel couldn't pinpoint the exact spot they had buried her. The investigators would have to wait for the snow to melt. The investigators now knew what had happened to Skylar, but with her body still buried in the snow, they had no evidence beyond Rachel's words. Knowing Rachel would be anxious to meet her body, they put Rachel's room under electronic surveillance and had her set up a meeting with Sheila. Unfortunately, Rachel wasn't able to extract anything incriminating out of Sheila. 2 weeks later, on the 16th of January, the investigators returned to the spot, this time with a canine unit. The snow had mostly melted. Whilst the dog handler was picking up a GPS tracker that had fallen off the dog, he noticed skeletal remains under a pile of branches. 6 months after she had disappeared, Skylar had finally been found. During the following months, Rachel was allowed to roam free while the investigators were gathering evidence, not only against her, but particularly against Sheila, who had not and would never admit to the crime. The investigators surprised Sheila and her family by serving a search warrant to seize every knife in the house and Sheila's car. Forensic investigators going in and out of a remote back road near the Eddy's family land in Pennsylvania could not be kept hidden from Sheila for long, or the public for that matter. A few local newspapers mentioned that a body had been found. While nothing specific about the body was mentioned, Sheila would now have known that Skylar's body had been found and that Rachel, in all likelihood, had led them to her. On the 13th of March, after the identity of the body had been scientifically verified by the FBI, Skylar's death was made public. Still, nothing about the circumstances of her death was revealed. However, the post-mortem later revealed Skylar had been stabbed over 50 times. On the day of the announcement, Sheila tweeted, "Rest easy, Skylar. You'll always be my best friend." Rachel posted several tweets, including, "Rest in peace, baby. I love and miss you more than anything. May you finally have justice." Sheila, as if goading the authorities, was tweeting back and forth with a friend about something unrelated when she wrote, "We really did go on 3. Throughout the month, Sheila also tweeted the following. On May the 1st, Rachel surrendered herself to the authorities and had her first day in court. She was transferred from juvenile to adult status and then pled guilty to the murder of Skylar Neese. She agreed to testify against Sheila in any trial. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to recommend 20 years for second-degree murder. While this was going on, Sheila was at the Cracker Barrel diner with her mum. The investigators then sent the nearest patrol to prevent them from leaving. The patrol intercepted Sheila and her mum in the Cracker Barrel parking lot as they were leaving the diner and arrested Sheila for murder. On the 4th of September, Sheila was transferred to adult status. Her arraignment was held on the 17th of September, where she pled not guilty to the charges of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. As the 24th of January was nearing, rumours began to circulate on the internet that Sheila was going to throw in the towel and plead guilty. The hearing was broadcast live on the internet. As soon as she entered the courtroom, the rumours were confirmed. Sheila started sobbing as soon as she sat down, even before the trial began. Often she would cling to her attorney for support. She changed her plea to guilty, and in exchange for her guilty plea, the prosecution agreed to a sentence of 15 years to life with the possibility of parole after 15 years. After the trial, David Neese swore that he'd be at every parole hearing to make sure Sheila never walks free.
Nothing will ever replace losing your daughter, but does this bring any sort of sense of closure, and can your family start to move on?
Like I said before, there's no closure at all, I don't think. I mean, who knows how my mind works right now. But if you can figure out, let me know. But the only way that there could be closure if they both were in prison. I know they're both in jail right now. One of them's been sentenced, one of them hasn't. After the other one gets sentenced, then we can start worrying about all that. But right now, I don't think it'll ever be closed. My little girl was something you can't close.
Rachel's sentencing hearing began on the 2nd of February. Rachel looked as if she had walked through hell, appearing pale and bloated. She accepted the sentence of 30 years for second-degree murder with the possibility of parole after 10 years.
And still to this day, we do not know why they did this. And that is a question we would like an answer to. Because what in the world would be so bad that you would have to kill Skylar and to put her through what you did? You didn't think about that when you were doing it, so why would we need to think about how you feel now? You stood there for over a year comforting, being with us, telling us you knew nothing. When the police and everybody was coming close, then you decided to confess. You need to think about everything you put us, your family, and everyone else through with not being able to have the pleasures that other kids would have. No grandchildren, no marriages, no prom, no graduation. How do you think that would make us feel? You don't get it, and neither does Skylar, but at least your parents get to see your face, get to talk to you, and see you. We don't even get that luxury. They get to say goodbye to you. We never got to say goodbye or anything. And I hope that you really and truly regret for what you did.
I'm here today with my wife, Mary. I'm speaking to you on behalf of my daughter because she can't be here. On July 6th, she made a decision to leave our house and go through a window and supposedly go with two friends, and I use that term. I'm sure you know what I mean. When we learned that she was missing, we immediately went to the Star City Police, who couldn't do anything with us, so they just listed her as a runaway. Since that date, my wife's life has drastically altered. We are no longer a family. The person sitting before you, Skylar's so-called friend, took her away from us without any remorse or feelings. You can look into the eyes of those who are responsible, but you can never hear what they heard as they were taking her life. You can see the faces of the killer, but you can't see Skylar's face. You can never understand the fear that she must have had as they took a knife and ended her life. You cannot imagine the pain that Skylar must have felt and the pain that Mary and I now feel. Your Honor, Skylar deserves to be heard today.
Both are currently serving their sentence at the Lacking Correctional Center. The most disturbing thing about this case is that there was no motive other than they no longer like Skylar. I mean, if you don't like her, simply don't be friends with her. You don't just go around getting rid of someone just because you don't like them anymore. If that were the case, we would all have to watch our back. However, there's still some speculation that their motive was the fear of Skylar telling the secret about the girl's sexual encounter, especially with Rachel coming from a religious background. Allegedly, Rachel has now married an inmate from the same correctional facility.
What are your thoughts about being up here now 5 years since when your daughter died?
It doesn't seem like 5 years, does it? It seems like 5 years has went really quick. It's the fastest 5 years I can ever remember, but being here in the first place, like I said, gives me a feeling of almost a subtle feeling, like a smooth feeling, like it's Skylar kind of telling me it's okay, Dad, you know, it's almost like it's a place where she wants us to come.
How much do you miss her?
Oh, God. There are no words to even describe it. It's horrible. Every day. It's a feeling I never, ever wish on anybody. There's no words to even describe it.